Welcome, friends, to IAMPETH's Inside the Penman Studio. Today's guest is Penman, an engrosser and illuminator, and Master Penman, Rosemary Buczek. She's been kind enough to speak with us. Rosemary, thank you so much for coming and agreeing to talk with us. Let's start off at the beginning. When did you first become interested in the calligraphic arts?
I first became interested in the calligraphic arts when I was 19.
Okay.
I was attending a four-year undergraduate program as an art major, and I saw my first illuminated manuscript when I was 19. Mm-hmm.
So the illuminated manuscript, actually the same thing for me. It was the illuminated manuscript that sort of kept my interest into it as well. Now, how about the pointed pen, the pointed pen work? When did that sort of, when did you take notice of that?
Well, when I was just about to graduate, the chairman of the art department, Sister Gerardine, handed me an envelope, and she said, "Rosemary, I have no idea how this was done, but I think you should have it." Someone had given it to me. I looked at the envelope, and in the corner, the return address was printed, but it had been done by hand. International Association of Penmen and Teachers of Handwriting.
Right, no E. Right.
Correct. And I later found out that it was done by de Jezeray.
Wow. De Jezeray, for those of you in the audience who may not be familiar with his name, is widely regarded as at that time, the last, it's in the 60s, the last of the true ornamental masters. And I'm lucky to say we have some people around today who can do some pretty fine work as well. But was an amazing pen artist as well. So that's a fantastic, fantastic story. You mentioned, art department and stuff. Tell us something about your training, Rosemary. You had some formal training in art?
Yes, yes. I have a bachelor's in fine arts, but my emphasis, by the time I had graduated, my emphasis was in the lettering arts. In fact, my senior thesis was a book. Okay.
Do you still have that book?
I do. I do. And I pull it out now and I show my grandchildren.
Okay.
And it reflects the late 60s, early 70s, because all the pages are olive green and orange and tan. and it was done on sample paper from a paper company, because I was a poor art student and I used anything I could get. Okay, all right. Rosemary,
during your formative years in the pen arts and in engrossing and illuminating, who do you point to as mentors?
Well, I would say, other than Sister Gerardine, who chaired the art department but had this passion for lettering, the next great influence was Walt Williamson. And I met Walt Williamson in 1972. I graduated from college in 71, and I was married in 72, and my husband had a friend from at work who knew Walt Williamson when he found out that I was a calligrapher, and he said, "Oh, your wife should meet this man." And so they made an appointment for me to go and meet Walt, and I was in his little studio in his home, and I was just blown away by his work. I mean, his work was perfect. It was just incredible, and he invited me then to apprentice with him, and he also invited me to join what is now IAMPETH.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's amazing how these impressions we get of things, even though if you scrutinize them with a trained eye, you may be able to pick something up, but the overall impression is that, when it's done at a high level, the human hand couldn't have done this. And then you realize it can, and then you can learn the techniques of sort of accessing that. With the pointed pen art specifically, and I realize that a lot of what you do is, in fact, the text lettering and illumination, but I know you definitely indulge in the pointed pen arts. Do you have a particular style that fascinates you, you particularly like writing? Spencerian script, engrosser script, or? Well,
for the most part, I would be on engrosser script. I do not consider it my most proficient hand because I'm left-handed. Okay. So I can do it, and I feel like I can do it passably, but I do not consider myself one of the masters when it comes to pointed pen, and that's because of my left hand and how I write. So.
Speaking of left-handedness, let's just a few questions about that, because as I said in the interviews with both John and with Rick Muffler, It's interesting because you'll hear lefties tell you that, well, they can't, let's say, they don't think they can do calligraphy because they're left-handed. And it's very interesting to note that when we inducted our first group of master penmen into IAMPETH's organization, of those 5 people, I think, that were inducted, 3 were left-handers: Rosemary, John DeColobus, and Richard Muffler. So you can do it. There was even a history in the history of ornamental penmanship. There was a gentleman who had no forearms. His name was J.C. Ryan, and J.C. Ryan would actually do ornamental penmanship with essentially his elbows holding the pen. And there are pictures of Mr. Ryan on my website, zenarian.com, if you go to the Gallery of Master Penmen. But Rosemary, what particular challenges, if any, did you face as both a child writing in school and then further on into calligraphy as a left-hander?
Well, as a child, I never realized I had a problem.
Right.
I went to a Catholic school, and penmanship was really, it was taught. It was very important. It was prized. It was just as important as history or geography or arithmetic. And we were graded on it all the way up until 8th grade. And I never thought I had a problem with it. I just wrote, my paper was straight, and the righties had their paper tilted. It wasn't until I was in college when I realized Sister Gerardine, who was teaching the lettering classes, said to me, "You can drop the class, Rosemary. I have no idea how to teach you." And I remember thinking, why do I have to drop the class? And that's when it really occurred to me that I was going to have some challenges with this subject.
Okay.
And it didn't occur to me. I loved it. I had just fallen in love with this whole idea of miniature illustrations and the whole art of illumination. So,
because in general, right-handed people are sort of oblivious to some of the challenges faced by left-handers. I guess unless you have a child who's a lefty, then you can sort of relate to some of the challenges they face. But for most of us, we don't think about that.
no.
So, okay. And so when you came into the pointed pen arts, I know, again, you said that you don't do, it's not your main thing, but when you do it, there's so many different approaches to a left-handed person writing, let's say, in grocer script. If you don't, typically it's said if you don't have a hook, you can use a straight pen holder. If you write with a hook, you can use an oblique. But there's different examples. Rick Muffler uses a reversed oblique, so it's on a different side than a right-hander would be. He, I think, writes with a hook. John DeColobus doesn't write with a hook, but he chooses to use an oblique. You write with a very interesting oblique pen holder. Somebody made that for you, right? You didn't get that stock, right?
No, that's not stock. I have a couple of pen staffs by Mike Sull and a couple by Bill Lilly. But my husband fashioned the flange that goes into the pen.
Okay.
And because he made many flanges for the pen holder. And I would sit and tell him, well, the righties have, the pen point goes there with the righties, can you get it for me? So he fiddled and fiddled. He's an engineer, and he fiddled and fiddled and fiddled until he finally figured something out that I could.
And you have that pen holder with you at the conference?
I do.
Okay, at some point I'll get a photograph and I'll post it to this interview so people, I could try and describe it to you, but I'm not sure if I could. But I think let me ask you this question. Somebody coming into this art form that has the concerns you had about this. Now, obviously you said about engrosser script or Spencerian that you did feel there was some limitation, right? John DeColobus is probably the finest pointed pen artist alive. I mean, I say that in all sincerity. And he is somebody who's achieved an incredibly high level with the pointed pen. So what advice would you give someone coming into this who is lefty and has this concern? Because people have concern, I'm not naturally artistic, I don't have this. You can learn these things. So what would you say to someone who's a lefty? What would you suggest they do, or how would they proceed?
Well, I would imagine they should just spend time with the penman who writes the most like, or holds the pen most like they do. It seems like there are more, the few lefties I've met write more like John.
Right.
Probably could relate to John perhaps more than Rick or myself. Rick, he hooks his hands somewhat like I do, but I think I have a worse hook than anybody. Yeah.
And that's not, it's just the way you write. Typically when a left-handed person person contacts me through the internet, I will send them to John. So if you are a lefty and you have questions, please don't not engage the art form. Come into it, contact myself or John DeColibus through our websites, and I will have the websites posted at the end of this interview. Rosemary, one question before we break for this segment. Of the past masters, there's so many great past masters, who would you point to as one of your favorites? Would there be one person you'd point to?
P.W. Costello.
Ah, okay. All right, yes.
Yeah.
So Patrick Costello, we're very fortunate in that one of his relatives was able to come up with a lot of his history, and even on Zinarian.com, I posted quite an expanded section for his work. He's a master engrosser, and also one of those people, would you say he had his own style, very distinctive?
Very much, and he created his own hands. He would just design his own calligraphic hands. Yeah.
Very impressive. It's a very distinctive style. Yes. Rosemary, when did you first learn about IAMPETH?
Well, I think I already told you about the envelope that was handed to me, and then a year later, it was a year later, that I met Walt Williamson, who introduced me to IAMPETH.
Okay, all right. And now IAMPETH, the International Association of Master Penmen and Grocers and Teachers of Handwriting, as you mentioned in DeJesure's letter, there was a time where the engrosser word was not in there. And so the title sort of defines who we are and our sort of mission. But from your perspective as a member, and as also as a past president, what do you see as the mission or the role of IAMPETH in the current art world and calligraphic community? How do you see it?
I see our organization as one of promotion and preservation, and I think, I would say those are my two favorite things about IAMPETH, and I think it should be the focus. We're preserving this beautiful art, and even though we don't reproduce everything exactly the way it was done in the late 1800s, or even the 1500s for that matter, we're preserving the methods, and that's what I cherish about this organization, and I cherish the fact that we don't really want to deviate very far from that.
So have you been to other calligraphic conventions?
I have.
Okay,
yes.
and I'm sure they're wonderful. I've only really been to IAMPETH, but is there something unique about IAMPETH? Do you find it?
Most definitely. In fact, Walt had invited me to join IAMPETH in 1972, and then I did not because I was intimidated by the word master. Right. And
many people say that.
Yes. And I was only 22 at the time, and his work was intimidating. His work was so beautifully perfect. Walt was a perfectionist. And so my husband and I went on and raised our kids, and then when it was 19 years later that I asked my husband, after involvement in Society of Scribes and Jersey Shore Calligraphers Guild, I could not find anyone who did the work that I saw in that envelope or that I saw in Walt's studio.
The level.
I didn't see that level. And so I asked my husband one summer, I said, can I please, would you take me to that conference? I dug out the information that Walt had given me, and I spoke with Kathy Saunders, and she was so warm and welcoming and invited me to come, and I've been here since. And Walt was there, by the way, and he remembered me because I hadn't seen him in all those years.
Yeah, it's amazing when you see work of that level. Rosemary, as one of IAMPETH's Master Penmen, you were in the initial class of Master Penmen that were inducted. What do you see as the role of the Master's program? Because as you said, that term has a very, it could have a very frightening term to it, especially a novice. And I think one of the things I've always tried to tell people about IAMPETH, we're made for all levels, and we particularly welcome to the novice, and it's important for them to know that. But is it an organization of just masters, or do we have people? We have people at different levels, right?
Well, yes, and that's what I love about our organization, because we are a welcoming organization. Right. We have folks here who have never picked up a pen, and they've come,
So for those people who do fit into that master's category of IAMPETH, what is their role in this organization? Why shouldn't a new person fear that? You know, what's the reason for the existence of the masters?
Well, because I think the masters can set the bar, maybe some would say set the bar high, but it's attainable with hard work and perseverance, and I believe that anyone can be a master if they, I really do feel that way.
Right.
It's a choice that we make.
And so is there a mentorship component or a instructional component?
All of us are willing, and I've been working with someone this year about, her skill abilities and just raising her skill abilities and what to look at, what to improve. Yes, and it's not, it should not be intimidating at all.
Right. Sometimes I think there's confusion that, some of us are striving for perfection. Perfection is for computers. We're striving for something that reflects the past but carries it forward, would you say? Fairly?
I don't do perfect work.
Me neither. Me neither.
I will never do perfect work.
No.
Yeah.
I've always said if I ever get to the point where I thought that about myself, I'd probably put my pen down and never write again.
And Joe, in fairness to Walt Williamson, if I look back at his work today,
Sure.
I probably would realize his work wasn't perfect.
Right,
but from where I stood at 22, which is where maybe a new person today, say a first-time attendee at one of our conventions, might have the same thought or feeling that I had when I was 22.
Right.
But I'm glad that there's that chance for just growth in
Absolutely.
And there's so much there's a large learning curve here.
From my perspective as a member, when I look at someone like yourself, who I have no painting ability or illumination. I mean, I can do some of it, but I'm so far off what you do. But the reality is that it's not something where you're the master and you're there and this is what I do and try and match me. No, you're very, as all of our masters are, very kind and receptive to helping anybody who asks you. I think that's really one of the things that the payment of history to the past and always observing that, but how accessible people are here. When I spoke with Jake Wyden, we were talking about sort of some of the best people at what they do in the world are in our organization, and it's certainly true of someone like, appointed pen people and illuminators like yourself. But you can come here and talk to people and learn from them directly. You can't go and see Arnold Palmer or Tiger Woods or everybody great and just sort of go to the golf game and afterwards sit down and eat with them. You can do that at IAMPETH, and that's one of the things that's always been real special to me. So I've always seen the Masters as sort of the way of teaching the pet to get to a sort of higher level, the next level of what you want to do. And that's the way I see it too. So let me ask you a question. For you, how has cyberspace or the internet affected you? Or influenced you, or what have you seen?
Well, the internet, for me personally, the internet, having a website and has just totally changed the way I work and do business. And before that, it was a matter of somebody coming to my studio and viewing my website, viewing my portfolio out of a book. Now it can be seen to as many people around the country or over in Europe. So it's just a wonderful way to do business. And also we don't have to send samples.
Right.
So I've really appreciated the internet for that reason. It's made the world smaller, but it's also the reason why more people are finding out about us, and we're accessible to many more people.
Absolutely,
yes.
Absolutely. Rosemary, pointed pen, getting back to that real quick, do you have a favorite nib? If you could get one nib to write with forever, and it doesn't matter what the nib is, what would that nib be?
Well, actually, that Perry 28's been a fascination to me, yes. It's a long nib, yes. It's about 100 years old. Yeah.
I mean, some of us write with nibs that are that old. Okay. Yeah. The last question I have for you, Rosemary, for this interview is, if you had a time machine and a video camera, and you can go back in time, which calligraphic artist or master of the past would you want to meet and why? Interview.
I would love to meet Simon Benning and the Limbourg brothers, and those gentlemen lived in the mid-1400s, when they worked then. I would love to learn more about how they layered their pigment, ground their pigments and layered their colors, because they did a lot of layering, thin layers. I would also like to meet P.W. Costello.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, Rosemary. Thank you again. Bye-bye. And thank you, audience, for joining us. And stay tuned for more.